and that's going to be available post the event, and we're going to send you a link as soon as the webinar is over, and we've got the attendee data in, so you don't have to sit and take notes. We're going to have everything there for you, and you can visit it on demand. So just to recap for those who have just joined, this is the Directors Club webinar on social media and updating us on the social customer service scene and how social is now powering business. I'm going to be joined by our colleagues at Ciboodle, Stephen Thurlow and Mitch Liberman. But before we do that, I just want to run through some housekeeping with regard to today's webinar. You're going to be able to post questions to myself and to our expert panelists, Mitch and Stephen, and you're going to be able to do that using the floating toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen today. Now, that floating toolbar has a question mark on it, and all you have to do is click on that question mark and a Q&A window pops up, and in the smaller part of the window at the bottom you've got 256 characters to post your question, and that will come to the panelists. We will review those during the event, and then at the end we're going to have a Q&A session with our experts, and we're going to address some of those questions. Now, obviously, if we have lots of questions and we can't address them all, what our panelists will do is they will address them personally by email post the event. So your questions can be as simple or as complex as you like. So if it's just a little definition you need, well, you can pop that in, or if it's something a little bit more complex, that's absolutely fine as well. Now, we're also going to have an interactive element to today's session, and that interactive element is polling, and we're going to have 3 polls during the slideshow, which will follow my introduction. And all you have to do is watch out for the polling panel on the right-hand side, and when we open that poll, you'll have a chance to put in your answers just by clicking your choice, ABC or ABCD, whatever the responses are to that particular question, and then we'll be revealing the results as we go along, so we can see what the outcomes are straight away. So you can also contribute or chat about or respond to the webinar today by using the hashtag Ciboodle, and there it is on the screen. And Mitch will be touching on that when he begins his presentation as well. So today's topic, well, today social is turning customer service and support on its head. It is fundamentally changing where and to who people look to for help. It is making communication far more disjointed, asynchronous and immediate. And the time between the complaint and the cause of the complaint is reduced right down to moments. Now, this change has a profound implication on the way customer service needs to be thought about and provided for within your organizations. Now, in this webinar, we will explore some of these themes around the idea of social customer and how they're challenging traditional notions of customer service. We'll also be looking exclusively at the highlights of some new original research from independent analyst thinkJar research on how far businesses have all come in supporting social customer engagement. So, to take us forward and to address all that, I'm going to hand you over now to Mitch Liberman, who is joined by his colleague Stephen Thurlow. And Mitch, are you there?
Mitch is here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Mitch. Welcome, and thank you very much for sparing the time today to give our audience some real original insight into the state of social. Now, I'm going to change the slide panel over, so just bear with me a minute. There we are, Mitch, and I'm going to hand you over control of the slideshow. So I'm going to make you the presenter, and you should now be in full control. So I shall go away, but I'll be standing by if there's any technical issues. But Mitch, over to you.
Great. John, thank you very much, and thank you for having us today. We're very excited to speak with you and to the audience. My name is Mitch Liberman, and I am charged with looking at the CRM market and the customer service market for Sword Ciboodle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to a couple of slides, and then I'm going to, and Stephen and myself are going to hand back and forth. Stephen, do you want to just do a quick introduction of yourself now? Is that okay?
Thanks, Mitch. Hi, this is Stephen Thurlow. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Sword Ciboodle, and my job is to make sure that the products and software and capabilities we produce is matching and helping drive customers' both demands and possibilities within how they engage their customers across all sorts of channels.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to start off with a little bit of some of the things that we're interested in, and to tease people just a bit with the research that we did with thinkJar and their principal Esteban Kolsky, is we were very interested in how and why people are doing customer service using social. We wanted to start off with a little bit of a primer into why this is an important topic. And you know, the intro slide is from the research, and what we found very interesting is that why people are doing it, and they're doing it to increase satisfaction, to meet customer expectations, and to realize what our respondents called intangible benefits, and as well as loyalty. And you have to go way down the list to tie revenue to this particular topic, which is interesting in and of itself, and we'll touch on that in a bit. The key themes here is that through a friend in conversations in industry, specifically Brian Velmuir, who kind of really put a nice dot on it, social, specifically in the customer service realm, is really digital. And what that means is social is the way in which people act and the way in which people respond. The channels used are simply digital channels, but they have a larger purview. They have a very large audience. They are very public, and so you have to consider why people are doing it. So we have new channels, but we're making some of the same mistakes, and I'll put myself in that camp as well. And when we talk to companies and respondents and we listen, some of the same mistakes are being made, and we'll get into some conversations on where we see how we can fix that and what led us to that conclusion. And finally, we'll touch a little bit on, there's a lot of data. We want to turn that data into information and to put in front of people that are responding to customers and give them insights so that appropriate actions can be taken to customers that are having a particular issue or simply want to share. So as I said, these are digital channels. What are the digital channels? Well, we know email was among the first, and web itself is a digital channel. But then we can think of things like Facebook is a digital channel, and Twitter is a digital channel, and communities, places where people go to talk to other customers or to the brands or companies themselves. That is a digital channel. SMS is also a digital channel. The topic is important because what you end up having is a bit of a turf battle. Nobody argued 20 years ago about inbound phone calls that were a product issue. That simply got routed to customer support. So nobody argued about it. Nobody else, meaning unless they were asking about a new purchase, well, then sales wanted the call. But marketing never really wanted to answer that particular phone call. But then we moved on to new channels, and we had email. And email outbound, well, marketing began to use outbound email about 10 to 15 years ago. But it was outbound. It was a broadcast medium. Simply just followed suit from direct mail and physical paper in white mail. But then the digital channels became more and more used. And there was a little bit of a battle, and maybe battle is too strong a word, but I think people can relate to it, that suddenly customers were talking back a little bit. The idea of a forum is not new. It's been around for a long time. But it was in the realm of purely a very technical people, forums on Apache web servers and other, technical type issues. But suddenly regular customers started to engage on these forums. How do I use this product? Why is it broken? Why isn't it doing well? And marketing was the one broadcasting the messages, but having a little bit of a problem. How do I answer these questions? And fast forward to now, and you have these very public networks, such as Facebook and Twitter, and LinkedIn, or review sites such as Amazon, and suddenly the companies have to respond. But marketing is not used to responding, they're used to talking, and there's been a transition over time. So that's where I get to the final point here, which is that the context and the intent are important. So Stephen, any thoughts on where we take it from there, from a context and intent as we move on to some of the new channels?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And I think that whole area of context is one of the fascinating ones. And I think particularly I think it's true in all forms of interaction, but particularly as we look at the social interactions. Some social interaction will happen outside the organization, some will happen in a way that's visible to the organization, and some will happen actually to the organization itself. And I think one of the whole things with the social dynamic and with the digital channels is understanding the context. Without doing that, it's very hard to be able to understand how to route and deal with, and even know whether it's important to deal with a particular interaction or post or action or event that happens in the customer's landscape to be able to bring that in. And it's also important to understand what the intent of someone is when they're initiating a communication. If someone's actively phoned a contact center, it's sometimes easier to determine their intent than if they've just tweeted about something. That sometimes the social channels will get used far more for venting and for complaints rather than for action and transaction. But equally, sometimes they are, can you help me? And it's understanding within the context and the intent of these things how they come together and how different channels can actually do that. Because going back to Mitch's example of email, it's fascinating looking back over the last probably 10 years or so of seeing how organizations have struggled to deal with email as an inbound customer interaction mechanism and as a customer service vehicle. It has some very powerful aspects to it, but it also has some difficulties implicit within it. And I talk to organizations regularly who actually don't even know all the sources of email they get. They don't even know how well they answer them, and they don't know how that is joined up with what the customers are doing on other channels and how it fits together, and the kind of chaos that can ensue by having an open door to interaction without any form of management or structure or intent around it from the organization's perspective makes it very confusing. And within that is this whole area of managing information, of understanding how what is said in a social context relates to what's going on in the wider customer context. So if somebody's tweeting about a flight, then they probably have a booking, and they probably have a history to that booking, and they probably have a frequent flyer membership, and they probably have a next booking and a next bit of travel, and the context and information around those. Joining those up is one of the challenges in the social world, and particularly as the marketing department has begun by doing some brand listening. It then spots customers with issues, and it doesn't really have the service context in terms of being able to answer and assist with that. So now some of it's coming over the wall to the service department and saying, can you pick up these things, can you deal with them? But the information is disjoint, and you get customers who are playing different channels. They'll Facebook post on one and get a refund, and then they'll phone the contact center and get a second refund for the same thing. And actually, there's a number of organizations we talk to where that kind of reality of people playing the channels, because the customer is more channel agile than the organization is, and the organization is typically very disjoint. So this whole area of looking at the lessons of the previous channels is we can learn a lot from what's gone before, because there's nothing particularly new in this. It's just that there are amplifications in the behavior. There's more you can see, there's some more possibilities, and there's a more immediate response to it. And I think particularly in terms of how social and mobile come together, the ability to initiate a social action to Facebook or Twitter or otherwise on a mobile device, and to check in and have location-based services, then that does bring an immediacy to it. And I think understanding customers' intent, customers' goals, customer life cycle around specific events is critical, so that we can actually say, well, what are the appropriate forms of communication based on the context, and what are the appropriate forms of communication based on the intent and the goal the customer has, and how do we put them together so that we can actually look up at a joined up view? Because we tend to meet a lot of organizations now who have a contact center, but then they have email, and then they have web chat, and then they're looking now at Facebook and Twitter, and all of these are separate channels of communication which might end up at the same people, but there's no real joined up nature and no visibility across the channels about how things are happening. And that makes it really hard to move forward, and it makes it really hard to appear as a single organization to the customer, which is how they perceive you as an organization. So one of the key lessons we see learned is integrating the communication channels to the extent that you can actually be joined up to the customer. And that brings us, I think, Mitch, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a great segue to what the question we wanted, the first polling question, which, and then we can maybe add a couple more insights, and there's a question about it as well. So the first poll question, John, if you can enable that for us, which is, how joined up are your channels? You know, we've talked to many customers, but there's nothing like getting some, you know, some real-time feedback to hear, you know, are your channels of customer communication channels integrated?
One moment, Mitch. Let me just grab that up. I just need to pull up the polling question. So apologies for that slight delay, ladies and gentlemen. I'm opening the poll right now. You can see it on the right-hand side of your screen. So how joined up are your channels? You can vote now, A, B, or C. Sorry, back to you, Mitch. Apologies for that slight delay.
Oh, not at all, John. I think there's a question, are we seeing a move away from traditional channels to social channels? And I think when we will talk a little bit about our research, and I think, you know, hopefully by the end we'll answer that question as well.
Just a couple more moments, Mitch, for people to finish their polling. I see that most people have put forward their answers. Ladies and gentlemen, just 3 or 4 more seconds on that one. If you haven't put in your answer, do so right away. Okay, I'm closing the poll now, and it'll take a few seconds, Mitch, for the results to come up. So I hand back over to you. The results will appear on the right-hand side. Great.
So what do we think, Stephen? Do we think that we're going to see lots of integrated channels, or we're not sure?
I'm expecting a lot of B that we'll see.
There we go. Applying the results now, so they'll be popping up in the next couple of seconds.
Unfair. Steve cheated.
Yeah, and I think that would tie up with our observations, is that clearly some channels have been, as channels have added over time, then there's a level of integration put in, but as the channels proliferate, the actual joined-up strategy hasn't really caught up with some of the independent departmental or channel-based initiatives to start connecting. And I think that, you know, it's very rare to see someone who's joined up all channels. So congratulations to the 3 people who polled on that they were completely joined up. So that's good approach.
Great. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is you know, a little bit of the high-level theme, Stephen, about, you know, how do customers do this? How do we take some of this data and do something with it and action it?
Yeah, and that is the challenge, because and the first point is the whole joining up that we've seen, because I think if you take information out of context, then it's very easy to do the wrong things, and the whole nature of context and joining it up gives you a better picture. But I find that there are 3 areas and 3 ways in which this cycle needs to work. One of which is what I would call the kind of immediate response, which is the view of saying that there is an issue that is a current service issue for a customer or potential customer who needs attention from someone able to help them. And that ability to spot an event, recognize it in the context of who that person is, what they're trying to do, and the fact that there's a service need, and then actually route and deliver that to someone who's capable of serving them. And that is that's the first level of this. Whereas the second level is then saying there's a whole bunch of things being said, particularly in the social networking sphere, that actually are really pointing at more underlying problems with either service processes or with product and propositions in their own right. So either their mismanaged expectations, their poor quality issues, their failure to deliver on promises. There's a number of areas in which that's a longer running element. And the key thing there is to know how to aggregate events as being related to each other. So I have a number of people are commenting in different ways about a product or a service, then can you aggregate them to understand what the root cause of these things is? So if, for example, somebody has a regional outage of power or communications, and then we see lots of tweets going on around that particular provider, we've seen examples in contact centers where they're getting lots of calls because complaining, but they have no knowledge internally of the outage. So there's been no aggregation of the events, either from across the different channels or from the internal systems to inform the agents that actually there is a general problem in the area and not just a one-off problem for that customer. So learning how to aggregate things, and it's important you join them up because you might just as well get a phone call as you do get a tweet, so joining those things up. And the third area to me is to understand how it fits into the customer's context and life cycle. It's saying how and when are customers choosing to use which channels and why. And only by looking at customers' history across a number of channels, but also about their goals, intents, and outcomes, that you start to get visibility into the customer journey. So is it that someone books a flight on using social media? No. Is it that they complain about the service on a flight? Almost certainly. So what are the places and times and variables by which the context or the events determine the customer's journey, and which channels are applicable when? And I think you can use that to then target those channels and to actually target the wider customer journey to understand how you assist them through the journey and give a better experience, to be proactive about how some of these things are removed.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. I think so what we would like to do, what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about the research and the questions. So we've raised some issues over the last 10 minutes, areas of concern, some things that we've seen, but we wanted to step beyond talking, to a small number of people and talk to a greater number of people and see if we can get to the root, to understand what people are doing, why they're doing it, when they've started doing it, and then the critical question of how they're doing it. So we did some research, as we mentioned, with thinkJar, and here are the questions that we wanted to ask. We wanted to know how many channels, social versus traditional, that companies are using. How long have you been doing customer service using social channels? Then critically, how are decisions being made to add the new channels? In other words, who do you trust in the organization? Who are organizations trusting to make the decisions or to look around to make the decisions on what to use? And finally, some regional or industry differences, which are not published directly in the report in extensive detail, but there are, we do highlight some points, and there's some really interesting differences, and we can discuss why we may see some of those differences as well. So from a methodology perspective, it was important for me when I was working with Esteban Kolsky, the principal of thinkJar, that we needed to ask the question over different channels. The hypothesis was, if we asked about social customer service on social channels, we would get skewed results. And if we only asked over email, we would get a different type of skewing. And we did see some differences when we asked over particular channels. And we were also able to segment geographies. We had a US-centric set of numbers, and we had a UK-centric set of numbers as well. So we asked, and we had over 400 respondents, which was good, and we were able to actually analyze over 375 of them. And what we found is some really interesting data, and we needed to turn that data, as Stephen previously spoke of, we need to turn that data into some information and insights so that we can then share it. And we have shared the results, and we can make it available. It is available currently to anybody that wants it. So what did the research teach us? Social processes are a bit immature, and we have data, and we'll dive into these. Decisions are made by a combination of data and instinct, and I think we should do it. Measuring success here is a bit tricky at the moment, and there is a continuation of the theme. There's a little bit of an integration problem between the data and the data plus the process. So what I'm going to do is let Stephen talk a little bit about the processes, and what we found, and you can see in front of you, is that social processes using social channels are pretty significantly less defined than standard channels. Stephen, any comments here?
Yeah, and I think this is quite interesting and kind of shows how much the social channels have arrived at speed and haven't necessarily been considered in the whole picture of customer engagement, and not necessarily mapped against how existing channels might function, but actually looked at how to get some kind of response out there quickly to be able to engage with the channel because something's happening, so we need to engage with it. And I think what's around that is that the actual process for how and when to deal with that are very, very poorly defined, and I think there are some things about poorly defined processes that are actually quite good because you're actually engaging people, and I think there's times in which if you get the right culture and capability of people engaging socially, you do actually create a dynamic there that is slightly different from something that's a bit more dry and policy and procedure driven. And but the reverse is also true, is you then get policies and procedures that are far too rigid, and you get cases where you see a Facebook page where someone posts on the wall saying, I'm having a problem, and then you say, can we take this offline, please? And I'm having a problem, can we take this offline, please? And you see a sequence of those events, and what you don't see is a conversation between the organization and a customer. Now, clearly, in some cases, that's private, and you can't deal with that, but you also don't always see someone coming back and saying, thanks for helping, or what about this, or has anybody else got this problem? Or so you don't always see those dynamics if you're very rigid and close it down very, very quickly. So processes can be too rigid and can be too loose. And I think that the challenge with social service processes is that organizations are still learning that they haven't worked out how to put the process of saying, is this important to deal with? Who should deal with it? How should I deal with it? How should I communicate and feedback? How should I review my results of that? And how should I avoid it happening in the future or enhance this experience in the future? And that wider process, and even to the extent of actually saying, how do I get comfortable that my service staff are going to write things that go into the public domain with no guards between them? Or do I put quality management and process guards and measurement around the social interaction to actually support them in a much better way? Because if you look at the effort that has gone through the processes of managing a contact center interaction over time, if you look at everything from call treatment and routing through call recording and workforce management, through team coaching, through application design, all of that maturity has an applicability into the social sphere as well. And by actually joining this up in the channel infrastructure, you start to bring some of that discipline and also the creativity and innovation of how you manage and move forward channel engagement over time. You bring all of that into the social sphere, and I think that's one of the key areas that we see is ill-defined, but it needs to move on.
And I wanted to, but I transitioned to this slide because I think this can help shed some light on why some of the processes are not as defined as, for all the reasons you just stated, but there's also why are companies doing it? In other words, when we ask the question, when deciding whether to offer a new support channel, what impacts your decision? And I was very happy to see that my customers are requesting new channels. And a channel is, the form of communication that the customers, I'd like to communicate with you by Amazon reviews. I'd like to communicate and make sure that you're listening to your Facebook wall. It's not just a marketing function that if I say something there, you're going to respond to me. And even if it's not positive, you're not just going to click the little X and take it off. So the customers are requesting this. Research and analyst reports. But here's something interesting. Over half are doing things because, well, their competitors are doing it, which means it's good that companies are being agile and trying to respond to the competitive landscape, but it might shed some light as to why processes are not as well defined as they are for other channels, which are sometimes internal decisions. Because of the social landscape, companies are making decisions more quickly, and there's not enough time to put all the processes in place. So that's my quick. Any thoughts on this particular one, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it is actually I think the point of the previous slide about the decisions happening by instinct. There's a view that we need to do something, and organizations have got a need to respond, but actually how and why and where it fits together is less strategic and structured And some of that is good because it's good to put a toe in the water and test it, but equally you've got to go wholly for some of this or not. You can't kind of dip your toe in and hope that's going to be enough. You've got to have a plan of how that builds up. So I think for organizations to be more strategic about this will help them. But you're right, I think that some of the confusion just now is that different people are touching the social world in different ways for different reasons.
So further, we asked the follow-up question, which is when selecting the new channel for your customer service solution, who drives the decision? And the majority is the internal team is driving the decision. And when we correlate this with some other other research by Forrester and Gartner and others, and even IBM CMO study, this is coming from top down, which is the translation by the CEO of we need to get closer to our customers. And there's a connection point that's being made in the industry. Well, that sometimes means, well, social channels are a good way to get closer to our customers. So they do ask questions on surveys, but the internal teams are heavily relied upon. And that's encouraging because internal teams know the customers better than anybody else. As we said, when we ask the survey questions, we see differences based on geography. There's differences based on industry. So culture plays a bit in it, and because different channels, traditional channels, phone, email, face-to-face, have been around a long time, and people are comfortable with those, most people. In the new world, there's social channels, but there's many different, slight nuanced difference between social channels. Twitter is slightly different from Facebook, which is a little bit different from a community, where people you have to log in and you can converse with other customers. There's some slight differences here. And when you actually make the decision, people are only using analyst reports and pundits as guides. They're not simply doing it because people are telling them to do it. And then the question is, how do you measure success? So this is very similar. This is where the very first slide of the intro to the webinar came from. It came from this raw data. And basically, what it's saying is increased customer satisfaction is the biggest driver. And loyalty is also a very important driver, and I was actually happy to see that customer service over social channels right now is not towards a direct increase of revenue. People are not trying to increase their revenue by using social channels. And they're trying to increase satisfaction and meet their current customers' expectations. So what the companies are seeing is the customers, their customers, are expecting them to be on social channels, at least according to our research. Stephen, any comments on this?
Yeah, agreed. I think this is a very interesting one, because I think if you look at customer service in the more traditional channels, particularly of contact center and email, there's been so much focus on cost reduction or turning things into a profit center and sales conversion, and actually they've often excluded the genuine customer experience and doing what's right for the customer, and actually building the brand loyalty has almost been a victim of that drive to reduce cost and the drive to increase revenue. Whereas I think when people engage on the social channels, there's an implicit recognition that the organization is not so much in control of this. This is about a response to a customer, and actually their experience, their satisfaction, and how their loyalty flows from that are the critical elements. I think it's going to be interesting to see this over the near future about how cost and value are measured. And I think it needs to bring back into the wider customer service sphere where satisfaction, loyalty, and the various recommendations and meeting of expectation move within that. Because I think particularly as service quality now becomes a key measure of brand that people will assess ahead of purchase, then all of these channels factor together in that. But I think it's great that the social channels have been driving it from that experience and satisfaction point of view, and I think that needs to pull to continue to be in the lead to really pull the whole integrated channel approach together.
Right. Actually, I want to highlight one point that you made, which is great for this one, but I think in general when it comes to data about social, whether it's social channels and usage and where customers are, trends I think are going to be extremely important as we move forward. Over the last year or two, the people that publish data have been able to get away a little bit with just saying, look, 30% of people are doing this, or 80% of people are doing that, which is interesting. But what's going to be more interesting is, well, 30% of people were doing this last year. Now 50% of people are doing it this year. And that's, the trending information for something like this, as well as all sorts of channel usage, your customers. So you really need to communicate with your customers as frequently as possible to understand what the trends are, not just what the pure percentages are. So moving on next now to a second poll question, asking the audience, how do you add a new support channel? Is it by customer request? Competitors do it? Consultants' advice? I ask my team, or a little bit of all the above?
Right, Mitch, I've opened the poll, so ladies and gentlemen, if you could put in your answers, A, B, C, D, or E, to this question. It's also a good chance to say now that we've worked our way through over half the presentation, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got any questions, just hit that question mark on the floating toolbar on the right-hand side. During the rest of the presentation, put in any questions that you have for Mitch or for Stephen. But the poll is now open. We'll keep it open for another 3, 4, 5 seconds. So, Mitch, over to you, and I'll close the poll in a few seconds' time.
Okay, great.
So, Mitch, your predictions on this one?
I think when I did it, I added that E at the end, and I regret it now because I think that E is going to be the winner.
Okay, we've closed the poll, so it'll be a few seconds while the answers come up on the screen. So back over to you, Mitch, and I'll press the apply and be on the right-hand side in just a few seconds' time. Great.
So I'll be curious to see where the results on this do come out, and after this poll, I think the rest of it will focus on try to think about how we get some of this done. So
you were right, I think, Mitch, that E has become big, but maybe that just means that people are socially deciding which channels to add because they're doing lots of requests and dips in there.
Right. Great. Excellent. It is telling that people are a little bit all of the above. So moving forward, one of what I wanted to do towards the end or the home stretch is something that I think I'm passionate about, and we're passionate about as an organization. We've learned a little bit about what's going on. We've touched the surface, dipped our toe in the water on why it's happening. I think it's time to move a little bit towards how to actually get it done. There's no shortage of people telling us what's going on and what you need to do, and maybe even where you need to do it. Oh, you need to be on Facebook, or you need to be on Pinterest, or you need to be on Twitter, or wherever you need to be. But then the question really is, how do we get it done? So, at the top level, even above a goal, is you need to have a mission. What is the most important thing you and your team need to accomplish? And then the goal is an end game towards which your activities and tactics are focused. And the strategy is a plan of attack. And then tactics and actions are the execution of that strategy. So, so an example, as Stephen mentioned, customers are using social channels to complain and vent, and other research suggests that if your core traditional channels, phone, email, SMS, your IVR, which is your voice response, the buttons that people press, if they're doing really well, there's actually less of a chance that people are going to go complain about you on social channels. And the other thing to remember is that this is a very important up-and-coming trend, which is customer support via social. But if you ask the customer side, somewhere between 10 and 20%, say 15% or so, of customers are actually using social channels. So we still have time to do it and get it right. So if your goal is to increase customer satisfaction, Well, how do you approach that? Well, among the ways you can do that is you improve the service experience, right, which is offer channel choice. You focus on the product in use, and you help people with things as online communities where they can talk to each other and help get some of your other customers to answer questions. Right? You can use things like video, so people can have a good idea, and your customers will create videos as well. The idea is to simply increase the customer service experience, which means, and here's a little bit of a change, among the changes is that there is we are seeing, and Stephen, I'll ask you to comment on this in a moment, a little bit of a reduction in standard metrics in the contact center. First call resolution is important, as is the total handle time, but they're used more for training aids and less towards rushing people off the phone. Stephen, any comments on that particular one?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think, as mentioned earlier, the traditional channels need to get back on board with the whole customer experience as a lead, and average handling time is a classic example of measurement. And the key thing is understanding an appropriate handling time. Is what's a good amount of time to spend with a customer based on their goal? Because customers don't want to spend ages on the phone if they're in a rush, but equally they do want to take time to consider the options if that's why they've called. And it's based on outcome and value, and also shared value. How does the value relate to the organization and the customer in terms of the interaction, and understanding how those measures come together. And also things like particularly cross and upsell. Cross and upsell will need to be totally appropriate to where the customer is in their journey, and not done on a percentage of calls for a revenue target alone. The revenue target is the result and not simply the driver, and it's actually more appropriate to understand the journey and where those kind of things come in. And that's going to be interesting as social matures, is understanding the measures that are most appropriate for it.
Right. I agree with that. Actually, I just want to highlight that one you mentioned. I don't know about you, but when I'm nearing the end of a call and it's clear I'm done and there's really nothing else that I really want to do, and they still ask me if I want a rental car, well, no, actually I'm going home, because that's part of their script. That kind of leaves me with a bad taste, and it's just you have to be able to be more dynamic.
Agreed.
So, the next part is, how do we increase loyalty and retention? We've talked about that it's important and why it's there. And the creation of passionate customers, it sounds like, okay, yes, people are telling me what to do, but how do you create passionate customers? Well, you recognize people and customers that have been repeat customers. You should know this. It's information that should be important. I see you've bought many books with us. I see you've traveled with us very often. And people like to be recognized for the value they provide to your organization. And then you can train your agents and have information such as that available to them. And you can reward the agents as well for a positive experience, and then they feel better, and then even in their voice and their tone, they can be positive with the customers, and they can spend a little bit extra time on social networks and talking about the brand. You can listen, and you can socially listen. We have a slide at the end. Really listen to what customers are saying, and don't ignore the bad stuff. Be actually more responsive. Learn from your customers and engage, and customers will appreciate it. And the organic growth is creating customers as brand advocates.
Yeah, and I think, Mitch, one of the interesting things on the engage piece there is that it is two-way. And I think all too often organizations are frightened of how to engage with upset customers in public, and yet there are values to being able to put out the good side of the story and the reason you do things, and actually that you are good compared to the competition, and there is a place for what you do, and there are some realities involved. And I think sometimes actually a common sense discussion can be as effective because that conversation is being watched by other people. And I think it's just as important what you say. So it's not just a customer complains and you go and you fall over at their feet and say whatever I can do. But nor do you say, tough Mr. Customer, I'm not interested. And somewhere in between is demonstrating yourself as an organization that can engage and really just demonstrate common sense. Because I think that's actually what a lot of consumers are looking for, is the common sense. Is they don't want to be ripped off, they don't want to be abused, they don't want to be ignored, but actually they don't expect you to move the world for them either necessarily.
Right, which brings us right to this last major goal, which is meeting expectations. And I'll just touch on it briefly and hand it to you. which is there's so much talk about wowing customers and creating superlatives are thrown left and right in how you should act, when many customers would be just a little bit happy if you could just meet their basic expectations.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and you know, the exceptional service is great, and it does create moments of truth and memories and recommendation that moves on. But the foundation needs to be good service, or good enough service, or repeatable service that actually organizations deliver on their promises, and therefore there's a level of trust, and then these other things become variances on that. And I think one of the interesting things around expectations in a social context is the whole area of immediacy, is understanding, you know, that from when someone tweets about your product, how long have you got to answer that for it still to be relevant? And obviously there's some that will get retweeted and moved on and go around, you know, if someone posts on a Facebook page, how long before you choose to answer that? So there's different things in understanding the channels. There are some that are used as just communication. So, you know, my teenage daughters would use Facebook the way I would use a text message on a phone. You know, if they want to find out what that's happened at school, they would, rather than texting a friend, they will actually just Facebook a friend, and they'll expect to get a response faster than by phone. And it's looking at what is the immediacy, what is the relevant response time and response manner for each channel, and also being able to channel hop. You know, and I think organizations dealt with recently, one of the best ways they manage emails is actually to phone the people back. And the same is true in social, is when to escalate the contact to a different channel and to actually make it appropriate to the engagement and treat it as joined up. I think the other couple of points on the previous slide, I mentioned the whole service with a smile, is there is something culturally different around social, the tone and the nature of the engagement is a little more visible than just a one-to-one phone call, and therefore, much as you would expect someone on a face-to-face counter to be engaging with that pleasant persona for a customer, irrespective of the issue, there's an element to which you need to bring that culture and dynamic to the social world. And then in terms of operational efficiency is a fascinating point, because we don't want to drive operational efficiency for its own sake, but nor do we want to be disproportionate in the way we service social channels, while actually the core channels are still broken. And it's understanding how, because some of the research that is deeper in the paper, which I welcome people to download, is that a lot of people don't actually track the cost to serve using social channels yet. The actual cost to service hasn't been measured. And to some extent that's a good thing, because you want to serve first and then optimize later. But there is an element of how do you bring it into the overall efficiency of the organization, that if by communicating more actively first and setting expectations you reduce service load, then you've actually become operationally efficient. And it's looking at how social channels play a part in proactive and engagement and expectation setting, as well as response times and how best to do that. I think, Mitch, you've just put our third poll up.
I did. I apologize. I was trying to be sensitive to our time.
No, hint accepted. Go on.
The poll is now open, Mitch. So everyone who hasn't yet voted in the third poll, if they could do so, we'll leave it open for another 10 seconds or so. Sorry, back to you, Mitch.
No, I just wanted to highlight. I wanted to kind of put this up here as you were talking about, efficiency and service with a smile. And one thing about social, which is interesting, is it's service with a smile over social is there's a nuance to it. It's hard. I mean, it's not, you can hear somebody's voice and you can hear their tone, whether they're engaged or whether they're not. You can hear if somebody actually has a smile on your face. I mean, you're tuned into it as a customer. And it's interesting to, how social fits into that, because social is supposed to be more, I guess, for lack of a better term, social. But it can be harder to give those, those non-verbal cues over 140 characters, or just, other than putting a little smiley face or a wink at the end, right?
Final couple of seconds, ladies and gentlemen, on the poll. Closing in 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. There we go. It'll be a few seconds, Mitch, before they appear on the right-hand side.
And I'll just take the opportunity to say we're nearing the end. If you have any questions and topics that we haven't covered, please do so. We have just a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
There we go, Mitch. The poll should be with you. The poll result should be with you.
There you go, Stephen. I'll let you take that one. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that shows what ultimately our core understanding, both from research and wider customer engagement, is that social channels are important, and you need to engage with them, but they're not actually yet the fundamental channels of service, and those are still fundamentally phone and email, and particularly face-to-face as well, if you're in that kind of retail or storefront environment. I think it's therefore all the more important to understand how social fits with the other channels, that you look at it as a holistic customer engagement approach rather than simply saying we need to do something in social channels because that's where all the customers are going, because there's a lot of hype and even overinvestment at times in social, when actually the key thing is to have a service culture in your enterprise that is strong, and then social becomes simply a channel of engagement. I think it's when the service culture and service capability is missing that social gets hyped and is more visible for what it is. But unless you can be good at service, social is just going to expose you as not good at service. It's not going to make you good at service.
Agreed. It requires, so moving from what to how requires the data, process, thought, and it requires real engagement. And real engagement, as we'll see on the next slide, includes very often the traditional channels, face-to-face, phone, and email. So the last, this is a busy slide, and I'll note that this will be available after the webinar is done, and I will also post it as well on our website so that people can have it, because this is what in our minds it looks like, and I'll walk people through it quickly. That the left side is the social customer, and it's about listening. And you need to combine the data that your organization already has. If they're a customer, you know their demographics, the interactions that they've had with you, the transactions that they've purchased, things that they've purchased from you, or the purchase history, and their preferences. But increasingly, we're going to have to combine that with things that we don't have or we don't own. Maybe their social ID, what they are on Facebook or Twitter or Amazon reviews. And what their reputation is, or their influence. That's a hotly debated topic of things like peer index and clout, and that's some people are very against it. Some people are thinking it's going to be important. For your industry, you will need to do it. Trip review sites are very important for people in the travel industry. And then there's data borrowed, which means that when people put things out on the Twitter stream, you don't copy it all, but it may reveal some information to you. There are LinkedIn connections if you're a business-to-business person. Who are they connected to, and what do they follow, and what topics? And you combine those things into a process, right? And so I'll hand it over to Stephen to kind of talk through the right side.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And it's just and then it's a question of understanding how to bring these things through into action. And that first area is getting a handle on the actual context. And that's things like intent and urgency. So if someone's raising an issue on a social channel or any other channel, to be honest, I think it's just as true. If somebody phones you at the same point, or their tweets, if it's just before their booking for a week starts in a hotel, then there's probably some association between the two. Therefore, the urgency is there. If it's 30 minutes before a flight, there's an urgency element to it. And then you can see how these different elements of context, and then you combine that with what you know about the customer, and you put a whole bunch of things together, and you have to decide how to do this. How do I marshal the resources of my organization to service this event? Does this event happen? Is it important? Is it urgent? What's the intent? What capacity do I need to marshal to resource it? And then, so the whole product support and marketing bit is just an example that different social activity is going to actually be of more relevance to different parts. So the product part of the organization needs to be listening to what is the feedback on the actual experience of use. The marketing department needs to be looking at brand monitoring and effectiveness of communication, and is the message getting out, and is it being passed on, or is it being fought back by other messages and other sites that are fighting back, and how do you engage with those? And then the support piece is how you engage with both the short and the long-term issues of understanding how these things come together. But ultimately, that's then got to get involved with a person. Is typically, I think social emphasizes the nature of person-to-person contact, and how do you equip the person who's going to serve to be able to make decisions, take actions, and engage the customer. And if you lock them down left, right, and center with measures, rules, and everything else, it's going to be very hard for them to engage in it. Whereas you actually need to back those off and then do some measurement to understand how the engagement, now that you've given them empowerment, is valuable, and over time educate, train, and develop that so that it becomes more and more fruitful and appropriate. But it's bringing these things together, the context, the who's it appropriate for, how do I engage that in a way that is empowered and enabled, and then how do I, is that person freed up and engaging the actual customer so that adds value back to their experience to achieve the full cycle.
Thanks, Stephen. So what I'm going to do now, John, is I think given the time, I think we should go right from here to Q&A.
That's absolutely fine with me, Mitch. If you wish to put, Mitch, your last slide up on the screen, and then everyone's got your download URL there for the research, and also some contact details for Ciboodle, so that you can get ladies and gentlemen back in touch with our experts if you've got any specific follow-up inquiries sort of post the event. Now, what we're going to do, Mitch, is we're going to trigger some of the questions, and then for the ladies and gentlemen who have to leave us at the top of the hour at 2 p.m. UK time, then we'll thank them very much in advance for being with us. But we will carry on a little bit over the hour so we can fit in some more of the questions. And if, ladies and gentlemen, you have to leave us at the top of the hour, you can catch up with the recording post the event and listen to the rest of the Q&A in your own time on demand. So just a question to kick off with, Mitch. One or two people have asked this question. Is if organisations are looking to pioneers in the social customer service world to sort of benchmark their thinking activities against, are there some organisations out there that they can look to who are doing this really well, who have perhaps pioneered this over the last few years and have reached a point where it's social is integrated into their portfolio of channels?
There's a two-part answer to that question. And the first part is, yes, there are companies that are doing it really well. And then the second part is there are companies that are publicizing to the world that they're doing it really well, but I'm not so sure they are. And it's a bit of maybe that's not completely fair, but what I've seen in talking to people in industry and talking to different companies in a private way is the companies that are doing it really well are not telling everybody they're doing it really well. They just are, because it's a competitive advantage, and we're so early in this. And I can think of two companies in the U.S. in the software business, if you will, consumer side of the software business. They're doing it really well, but they're not telling anybody exactly how they're doing it because it's a competitive advantage, and they have about a 6-month lead. So, and then there are the ones that we read about. There are the ones that are, say, Dell in the U.S. and giffgaff in the UK, which is doing just pure social customer service. And I would kind of leave it to their customers. The answer to that question is the customers need to answer that question of are they doing it really well. So that's my short answer. I think there are some, but I think you'll see more case studies come out soon. Stephen, comments?
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple of things there. I think there are service contexts that are deeply embedded in communities that I think are working really well. So there's a number of, whether it's tech support type communities, areas around kind of technical products that require that configuration, where the customer's own experience shared with each other is actually really powerful. And I think community and social customer service done in a community forum of which the expert customers become the primary contributors alongside the service agents, I think that those are real successes, and I think they both reduce costs, but they significantly improve the experience, and they also give huge amounts of product research and fact-finding and voice the customer into the organization. And I think the other end, there are some organizations in the very high-value end where actually it becomes part of a whole service delivered as part of a premium service. I'm not sure I see many people doing customer service really well socially in the pure commodity end that isn't one of those two.
Cool, and I suppose this this follows on in terms of the region of the world which are pioneering social customer service. Is the North Americans, Mitch, are they way ahead of Europe, or have we got pools of innovation? You mentioned giffgaff, the mobile phone operation over in the UK. But is the US the driving force of social customer service?
I think it's, first I would say it's not way ahead, and I think that it started earlier, for sure, about maybe, in terms of a little bit quicker adoption. I think that the UK is catching up very quickly, and in this industry, as in many technology spaces, a fast second can be just as good as a first, because you can see what worked and what didn't. So I think that the U.S. is a little bit ahead in terms of the number of companies that are doing it, but there's two possible reasons for that. One, they started a little earlier, and two, some of the data suggests that folks in the UK just aren't, when they have a service issue, they pick up the phone or they walk in face-to-face because that's what they're more comfortable doing. And to touch on a question that came out, and I can't read the link that was presented, but I think that social, Twitter and Facebook specifically, are changing the way we complain, but they're changing it in that what we're seeing more of is when traditional channels are not working, then people are more likely to jump because they feel like they have a voice. But if your as Stephen mentioned earlier, if your traditional channels are working, then the customers are either just going to say something nice about you, or there's not going to feel the need to go rant, if you will, on public channels. Stephen?
Yeah, I agreed. I'm a firm believer that actually having a good service and being contactable through traditional channels actually lowers some of the impact of social to you, because you're actually good at what you do, and people can get through on a call center, or they can get a response to an email, or they can go on a website and get what they need, or speak to a person. Social adds to that is more channels. I think the interesting thing around regions is that I think the US is ahead. I think the UK does still have some conservatism around public communication, I think, although it's catching up. I think the very interesting one, though, is going to be the emerging economies and developments. That I don't think they're going to wait as long before they pick it up, and I think for the nature of certainly the Western European and the US market is that customer service differential is a critical competitive advantage across all channels, and social is therefore driving that pressure more. I think as the emerging and growing economies come into that, then they're not going to go through a gradual channel adoption. They're going to have to face them all at once, but they're also going to look at a channel picture in the light of social media and mobility, and therefore I think they'll actually catch up relatively fast. And I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic as well.
Do you also think, Stephen, that the rapid adoption of smartphones and other mobile connected devices, tablets, etc., will mean that because people have much more convenient access to social media, and we see that Facebook's access via mobile is absolutely rocketing, that actually service via social media will become even more accessible, and perhaps people will more naturally go to it because they have the device in their hands pretty much permanently.
Yeah, I definitely think that mobile will be one of the key enablers of social. It's not so much social, it's more the social in the sense of almost a microblogging world, which is Twitter. So the concept of an event, something's happened, I want to communicate. So the ability to be able to communicate in context from wherever you are at a point of need has changed customer service in general, and it's much easier on a mobile device if you're on a train or you're out and about to actually be using something that's text or screen based than it is purely voice. But I think what will get clever beyond that is how we look at channel escalation. So yes, you might choose to touch an organization through your mobile device, but actually all channels can be relevant to that. So how do you say, I'd like someone to talk to me now? Or I've got a problem with this booking, please phone me, and that's instant. Or start a chat. And I think these channels will all come back together in the mobile device, but I think the mobile device will increase a number of these, and I think the thing that goes with that is the locality, because social and locality also go together, that people are connected to people, but people are also present in places and therefore associated implicitly with other people. I think there's some very interesting dynamics will come out of that, so we're in for exciting times ahead.
And do you think that the switch, Mitch, you guys over in the States might be getting this more than we are, but do you think the switch to even higher broadband or higher bandwidth mobile services like 4G, etc., will mean that the sort of the ease of movement between channels. So you might start an interaction on social, and then it'll be as easy as hitting a chat button or a voice over a voice over IP button to have a Skype style conversation with an agent. Do you think that sort of the movement between channels is going to become a lot more fluid?
I think yes, it will. The customers will want it, and the definition of fluid will be, can companies support it, right? So I think the customers will want to be able to channel hop. We're already seeing that. It's a little bit disconnected at the moment, but mobile, as I think you're pointing out, mobile is different things. And actually, I don't want to get into definitions, but mobile is, as Stephen's already pointed out, mobile is voice. Mobile is using my social network, just happens to be on my phone. It's geolocation checking in. Mobile is lots of different things. I mean, we have every customer, which is new, has almost an integrated, channel integration in their little handheld. You have it all there, right? You can simply jump from when you click on a link in an SMS. The browser knows your context, it knows who you are, and it can send the cookie. And there's all, customers. This is what's different and unique. Customers are ahead here. Companies have to catch up, and it's proved to be a challenge.
And in terms of I think following on from sort of the question around regional is are there industries out there which are the natural pioneers in this area? Obviously, one would think perhaps the online-only guys across various verticals would be the pioneers. Is that the case? Are there any particular industries, Stephen or Mitch, that are sort of way ahead on this?
It's tough. I mean, I'll give you an example. In the U.S., Best Buy is known as brick and mortar, but physical stores. But they were among the pioneers in the community in enabling their workforce to jump onto the social channels. So I think it's the early adopters are just the innovative companies trying to make their way in the space.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are some that it suits more naturally. I think there are some that are registered. So I think seeing how it fits into a credit card industry or an insurance industry is harder in the sense of, yes, it's important to have these there, but it's understanding, I think it's encouraging those kind of organizations to say, well, how can they be a provider of wider value, interest, communication, and a point of being to their customers? Because ultimately, if you're looking at motor insurance, you don't really think of that company socially. You might complain about them in the public sphere, and therefore they need to respond, but you're not actively looking for service in a social context quite so much. I think there was some where the information is very private, where the commodity almost must-have transactions that nobody really wants. I think it's harder to have that. The corollary to that, though, is then you get the consumer champions, where the consumers are already being social about that. And the question for these companies is, how do you get involved in, so in the UK that would be a money-saving expert kind of model, how do you get involved in a discussion around life insurance sales that as an organization saying, well, actually, how can we help? How do you listen to that and engage with that? Because also, once you engage with it, you need to be there, because people now know that you're there, they know that you're listening, so you need to actually continue to respond. So organizations across different sectors, I think, have got slightly different challenges, whereas I think those that are perceived as more kind of immediate value creation for the customer, I think there's a kind of cooler model around that where people will engage the social channel more easily. And I think things like travel and retail, clearly there's a core social backdrop to those in terms of recommendation, feedback, and ongoing advice between consumers because they share things in common.
And I think we'll cover a couple more questions and take this through to 1:15 on the live presentation. So just a couple more questions. One which is often asked is around how is it implemented on an organisational basis within organisations? Is this something which is being implemented within the traditional contact centre, or is social being something which straddles service and marketing? And also, is this something that traditional contact center agents add on to their set of skills, or do you have a specialist sort of team to do it? Are there any indicators, Mitch, on how that's being handled on an organizational front?
I think, John, we could have another 1-hour discussion on just that.
Try and keep it to 4 minutes, then.
I'm going to keep my answer pretty short, because I think really we could go into many different areas. I think the short answer is each company is trying to do it differently. Some are creating a shared service within the office of the technology to do some of the filtering and monitoring and route it per the diagram. Some have a chief customer officer. It's really, I do not see a consistent trend yet. People know what they want to do, but there's that turf battle slide. It's a bit of a turf battle right now because there's a lot of money and budget behind it. And so it really is, and we can have a whole subsequent discussion on that. And that's my quick answer. Stephen?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think ultimately it's actually simply reflecting that there is a core question still living within most organizations as who owns the customer. And that question actually ought to have been answered in that actually everybody owns the customer, and the customer should be the center of what the organization is focused on, and therefore it should be easier to manage the departmental models. And I think one of the things that social will do is it will pull organizations further into the what works for the customer view and not simply what works for the organization, so that marketing, sales, and service can no longer remain segregated as seeing a life cycle of a customer that happens over a long journey, because service and social communication really join that loop together. That service is critical in terms of brand reputation, which is critical in terms of choosing to purchase and choosing to buy compared to your competition. So I think organizations are different in how they're doing it, but I think it's highlighting the tensions that have been there for ages. They just haven't surfaced so clearly, and it is important for organizations to drive consistent customer ownership through the organization and to center around that. In terms of the contact center, I think it's an interesting one, because I think contact centers are not one size fits all, and agents vary hugely in their demographic and their age, because clearly a large number of contact center agents are now in the 18 to 25 range, where actually they expect Facebook to be a normal form of communication and not a new form of communication. So I think it's one thing that's very interesting, is you get the whole people coming into the contact center industry for whom social channels are normal. I think the challenge is how do you educate them to be social for the enterprise and not social purely for themselves. And I think that is a very interesting cultural dynamic that organizations have to take people through to understand what it means to have that professional social outlook and not simply just doing this with your friends.
Fantastic. I think Mitch and Stephen, we're going to leave it there. We're just about approaching a quarter past the hour. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, who have stayed with us since the formal end of the presentation at 2 p.m. Very, very much appreciated from myself and from our expert speakers today. Now, if you wish to watch the rebroadcast of this, we'll be sending a link through in the post webinar thank you email. You can also make contact with Sword through their website or via Twitter or via email. So lots of ways for you to make contact. And the questions that you've asked, which we haven't been able to respond to even in this extended Q&A, either Stephen or Mitch will be taking those up directly with you post the event, probably most likely by email or a telephone call. So thank you very much for all of our contributors today. Thank you particularly to Mitch and to Stephen. Thank you very much to Ciboodle for their ongoing support of our Directors Club educational and knowledge share activities. And thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us right to the end. A really interesting and engaging Q&A discussion, and I'm sure we will be updating you on this subject in subsequent future webinars. But at this very moment, thank you very much. We shall leave you now and hope to join you again at some point in the very near future for another Directors Club webinar. Have a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. All right.